Today's episode begins with something terrifying. Well, besides that, the Panama situation has escalated to American troops being taken hostage during an anti-American riot. While Reagan addresses the nation about this crisis, the situation is a proxy conflict between the U.S. and the Soviets, of course. We find that there's a similar crisis unfolding on the moon. The astronauts arrive at their lithium mining site, 357 Bravo, to find their gear has been removed and the Soviets have moved in to begin mining it themselves. The official term for those who do not know, I'm told, is hornswogglers. Back at NASA, they can't understand how the Ruskies managed to break their codes to learn about the site. The OPSEC is robust, and yet they seem to be able to read it like it wasn't even encrypted at all. We're going to skip over the response to this for right now because I want to give this topic room to breathe, so we'll pick it up at the end. After the titles, Tracy has overslept at her fiancé's place.
The car has a flat. I'm going to be late.
Which car?
You know, the car. My car. All the cars. Tell them all the cars have.
We've really got to stop playing with caltrops in the driveway. Well, Gordo's not in the best shape, and suffice to say, has to show up at his training in a polo shirt and his personal shame. While he struggles with that and how to use a laptop, Karen is busy planning their massive trip out east for Kelly's tour of potential colleges, and sheepishly Kelly suggests adding Annapolis to the list. Karen has a hard time taking that on board, and Kelly admits she wants to be a pilot, and not just any pilot, piloting F-14 Tomcats. The real deal. Top Gun Need for Speed, back when a carrier aircraft was designed to survive World War III, instead of being designed to survive a budget hearing. Last time, Margot had gotten a message regarding Aleida, and we pick up with her arriving at Aleida's trailer, finding her in the bathroom. Well, there's a rather awkward reunion, beyond her having to hand a roll of toilet paper over. It was Aleida's boyfriend that had called Margot. Seems she's in danger of being deported. Reagan has this amnesty program, for illegal immigrants, but it's so long as they are employed, and Aleida just lost her job.
All of your former employers, they all went out of their way to say how gifted you were, even as they acknowledged your behavioral issues.
Behavioral issues. I'm sure you're probably thinking something like, oh, it's someone who can't handle their mind being blown by her brilliant ideas, and so she mouths off to people who don't get what a genius she is. Well, here's the reality.
Behavioral issues, right? That's just bullshit. I didn't set fire to McDonnell Douglas, okay? It was just a trash can in that asshole's office and they put it out in like 5 seconds.
Imagine having to give a performance review with an extremely gifted engineer if only she didn't bring her pyromania into the workplace. And I'm no expert, but that sounds like a behavioral issue. I'd imagine reporting to HR is mandatory for that. I'm told you have a problem starting fires in your department. It was just a small one, and they put it out right away. Wait, that's not a metaphor? You're starting actual fires? Sorry, I need to get the big form out for this one. I was actually going to ask my sister about it. She's got a master's in HR. What she would do if one of her employees at her job was starting fires. Then I remember, though, she works at the fire department, where suddenly that question to us would raise further questions. Despite that, Margot offers her a chance to work as a systems engineer.
Poor Aleida.
This is not charity.
Poor little Mexican girl. You know, she got a big job at NASA because Margot Madison took pity on her.
You make it kind of hard to want to see you succeed, lady. Everyone's an asshole, blowing the fires I start out of proportion, offering me a job with opportunities for growth and to keep me from being deported. Everybody's a dick but me. Back at NASA, General Bradford privately brings up to Ed a possibility he doesn't want to think about. That the cosmonaut that he left outside of Jamestown last season could have potentially put a bug inside their outpost. It does seem more likely than their ciphers being that badly compromised. So they start scanning Jamestown for it, and sure enough, there's something in the overhead lights. Today's lesson, don't let your Russian prisoners do things unsupervised. Tracy hits the outpost to talk with Karen about her engagement, though Kelly's Tomcat dreams comes up. Tracy notes that simply saying no isn't going to work at this point. Kelly will do this with or without Karen, So she either has to make her peace with it and work with her on it, or live with the consequences of Kelly going off without her support. Tracy's probably right on this. She was wrong to try to drive home drunk, though, as the sight of herself on a billboard sent her right off the road and forced her to call Gordo to come and pick her up. This is still probably the most fulfilling relationship he's got going on right now. At her insistence, he takes her back to their old place, so the staff won't be standing there in judgment of her. She also takes the bed. And speaking of weird relationships, a lady on her boyfriend. She's not happy that he called the one person she never wanted to talk to again, but there is a moment of vulnerability as she worries that if she goes to NASA, she'll just screw that up too, like everything else. So he gives her a pep talk, and she decides, yes, she's going to do it, right after she dumps him. I can't help but thinking she's doing him a favor. The next morning, there's some tension between Tracy and Gordo. After bringing her back, he removed her keys to the house from her key ring on the grounds that she doesn't live here anymore. Also, as this must be Festivus, it's time for the airing of grievances, like not returning his calls, which is pretty rude for someone you expect to pick you up when you're drunk and crash in a field at 2 a.m. And his calls actually were important. They were to let her know that he's going back to the moon. And she naturally is supportive, and by supportive, I mean she laughs in his face. But pieces fall into place as she realizes he will be at Jamestown during a period that will overlap with her time at Jamestown. Still, that shouldn't be a problem, not unless you're fucking mental. So, after ranting at Gordo, she heads over to Ed to rant at him, laying into him that this is all some kind of publicity, humiliation bullshit paying her back for some imagined slight against Gordo. While it is theoretically possible that Ed did this to screw with her, I see it as being highly dubious. I mean, if there is one thing you can be sure of, it's that Ed gets how dangerous the environment of space is. He's sending Danny, a veteran astronaut, up, not as a mission commander, because she has been on the ground for a long time. He's sending Gordo back because he believes he's physically and mentally capable of handling it and can contribute positively to the program, but he's not commanding anything either. So overlapping with Tracy, it's almost certainly just a coincidence, as she's just being self-absorbed and entitled. Ed finally says if she wants to be pulled from her flight, all she has to do is say so, although it'll be highly unlikely she's going to get another one, as an astronaut being as unreliable and frankly high in the smell of her own shit as she's been acting lately doesn't make her an ideal astronaut for this day and age. Kelly finds some of Danny's old toys in the vent of her bedroom, but Karen comes by to ask for the why for Annapolis. Understand the reasoning. Kelly points to a number of reasons that show it's not a whim, from not having to just spend 4 years in the library to having the chance to make a difference in the world. Karen shares some of what it's meant to be someone like that, someone like Ed, the stress and the things that are missed, all based upon what she's been looking at their entire marriage. Well, those two talk it over, and Karen finally accepts that it's what Kelly wants to do with her life.
Let's do it.
Really? Are you sure?
You're gonna take 10 years off my life?
Nah, I don't see it doing that at all. Ed gets home while they're making dinner, and rather than being all for it, implodes. Then he puts his foot down. Short answer, no. Long answer, Jesus H. Christ, no! A fight breaks out, and Ed goes completely nuclear, saying if Kelly tries to apply, he will just tell Annapolis to reject it. He actually knows quite a few of the higher-ups to block it. When Kelly says she'll just join as enlisted and then apply from there, Ed tells her to leave, and then causes Karen to melt down at him, getting physical with him for trying to throw out their daughter after they already lost a son. Kelly has to finally step in and send everyone to neutral corners. After which, after everyone's had a chance to finally calm down, Ed admits he was overwhelmed by a sudden fear that he'd lose Kelly like Shane, and he's guilty because he wasn't there for him. I mean, that whole thing with the Russian bug, it's a reminder of that pain, and it was the reason he's stayed on the ground ever since, to protect them. But now that it's out there, things can be worked out. So they sing Anchors Away, and as they do that, we cut over to Gordo, who is finally working to try to get his shit together. Cylons. Didn't see that coming. I mean, it's not the crossover I'd expect more to put into this. No, it's just the VCR. Gordo settles in to begin a whole new day. Curtain. So, this is the time now that we'll jump back to the part I skipped over. That meeting to discuss the Soviets moving in to take the mining site 357 Bravo. Thomas Paine arrives to say that Reagan's not going to the UN over this. There's no way being able to park in front of a fire hydrant is going to be able to get them out of this one. No, Reagan wants the astronauts to take the site back. Margot is actually fully on board with that. It represents a massive investment in manpower finding it, and it's an essential step forward for the development of Jamestown. Now, admittedly, I would rather talk about space more, but, well, if we're going to see this, we got to discuss the complexities of this situation. Because the realities of foreign policy are, well, they're not always pretty. Something that might be lost on the, well, just look at it. It's the civilians who are all for this, while the active military are the ones who are leery about it. Let's start out our discussion by considering a terrestrial situation. The British Empire, besides being the largest exporter of Independence Days around the world, also drew boundaries that have caused problems, even up to the present day. I know you may be shocked to hear that, but it's nevertheless true. However, the one we're going to talk about is between Egypt and the Sudan. Now, in one decree, the British told the Egyptians their border was a straight line to the Red Sea. However, Sudan protested that this was arbitrary and didn't actually reflect their own settlement of the region. And the British reconsidered and instead drew a different border between the two of them. Then Egypt and Sudan both gained independence and proceeded to argue over the border, because that dispute was an area near the Red Sea called the Halab Triangle that was particularly valuable. In order to have a claim on that territory, Egypt accepted the first border as being correct, and Sudan the second border being correct. Or to put it another way, Egypt's claim is that everything south of the first border belongs to Sudan, and Sudan claims that everything north of the second border belongs to Egypt. Now, why does that matter? Because there's a goofy little intersection where one area is both south of the first border and north of the second border. Egypt says that area belongs to Sudan, and therefore isn't theirs, and Sudan says it's Egypt's, and therefore isn't theirs either. This is an area, then, that neither one is enforcing as their territory because each claims the other has ownership of it. And before you ask, no, you can't just go in there and say it's yours. Some people have tried. It doesn't work that way, as we're about to establish. The point is, nobody has a legitimate claim on that area and gives us an extremely rare example of terra nullius, land without a master. In the past, terra nullius used to be invoked to permit the colonization and expansion into territories that were otherwise occupied by people, claiming that, well, yeah, there are people living there, but that doesn't mean that anybody's actually in charge around there. Therefore, it's mine. Well, international law on the subject is actually built around saying, no, you can't do that. It's not built around what the regulations are for this extremely rare situation when it happens. Essentially, something where the only two countries that have a legitimate claim on it don't want it. Which is to say, then, that we're in a situation roughly comparable of that to the moon. We have a territory that nobody has a legitimate claim on historically, and thus it is terra nullius up there, or rather luna nullius, I guess you could say. What episode 1 of the season established is that statements of mining claims are sent between the United States and the Soviet Union, and that the State Department was to submit the claim for 357 Bravo. Well, given everyone's reaction to the question of how the Soviets knew to take 357 Bravo, it can be inferred that this was not yet submitted. If so, this makes this an even more gray area, besides the fact the whole surface of the moon looks gray, of course. Because as a massive instance of luna nullius, What is the basis for having a legitimate claim? What lets someone say, this is mine or that is mine? When you boil it down, what makes a claimed territory on the moon American is the willingness of the Soviets to honor that claim. Getting them to do so can be achieved only by three means: by them not wanting the site, by them not feeling acquiring the site is worth what is required to have it, or an inability to take the site. As this is potentially valuable lithium, that rules out the first, backed up by the fact they've gone so far as to go in and take it. In fact, it indicates the value to the Soviets because they are prepared to escalate the tensions between the two countries by this action, because they know it forces the U.S. into two courses: action or inaction. If they choose inaction, if they don't retake and hold 357 Bravo, then it shows in drop-off that the Soviets can take over other sites and likely get away with it. The only way, therefore, that the U.S. can avert having further claims disregarded and thus losing additional sites is to demonstrate a willingness to defend that claim. That's a lot of words to state the obvious, perhaps, so we have to establish the fundamentals of the situation in order to accept the reality. Many people have claimed to establish micronations in that terra nullius between Egypt and Sudan, and they are all worthless because they miss a foundational principle. No claim matters unless it is recognized by others as legitimate, either de jure or de facto, in word or in deed. And as below, so above. By moving into the lunar site, the Soviets are indicating they do not recognize America's claim on it. What's more, such an act is a movement up the escalation ladder, a move that can only be met by America with further escalation or by de-escalation. But de-escalation will mean losing the site. The only way to de-escalate without doing that is to give up something else worth more than the site, which would only kick the problem down the road until the next time the Soviets move in and take a site, having so profited from the last time. And the escalation ladder, if you don't know, is an escalation towards a nuclear exchange. And if that seems absurd to you, remember the U.S. went to DEFCON 3 over a loss of satellites for detecting incoming ICBMs just days ago. There's already tension here. You can simply say, take it back, like Reagan and Margot are saying. But baked into that is what is required to make that command manifest. Heading in after the Soviets depart and doing the same thing to them is not going to be enough. There needs to be round-the-clock security, which everyone is fine with. That security, well, it will not keep the site secure with words and gestures. You're not going to be able to keep the Russians out with some Home Alone-style defenses. As we've already established, you have to make them feel acquiring the site isn't worth what it costs, or you have to prevent it. This is Luna Nullius. There is no law here. The only way to compel the withdrawal of someone determined to take 357 Bravo is force.
Are the two of you seriously suggesting we send guns to the moon?
No one likes it, but this escalation is the inevitable consequence of your own demand to hold the site. You're calling in a plumber to replace your pipe, but you don't want them to tear open the floor. Well, then you've got to choose. Stick with the bad situation, or accept that only something else you don't like will solve it. Margot tries for the second criteria we mentioned, make it not worth the cost, throwing sanctions out as an idea. However, economic sanctions take time to have an effect, if they even work at all. They're very unreliable. Yes, they did contribute to the ending of apartheid in South Africa and forced Iran to the negotiating table over their nuclear program. But they didn't stop North Korea's nuclear program, and also failed to topple Castro's regime in Cuba. If the sanctions are multilateral, and if the country is economically vulnerable, and if there are clear achievable objectives, and if they're combined with diplomatic efforts, sanctions could possibly work. But when they don't, then it can have humanitarian impacts on civilian populations, harden the political positions in target countries, and push the target nation towards one of your own rivals. In this case, General Bradford notes that the economic sanctions they did last time actually blew up in their face. The Soviets began trading with Latin America, which has led to the increase in their influence within the Western Hemisphere. If anything, the sanctions made the situation worse. So if you wanted to make this work, you'd need to form an international coalition willing to accept the economic consequences of not trading with a superpower in order to increase the impact and give it legitimacy, all while rolling the dice that it not only won't fail to work on the moon, but that it also won't undermine America's position on their own planet. Never mind in our own backyard. Ellen tries to say that none of the astronauts are trained for this, except that's not quite true. Ed notes that before being admitted to flight school, Marine pilots are first trained as infantry. So the Marine astronauts are actually prepared for the possibility of ground combat on the moon. I mean, as far as if anybody could be prepared for ground combat on the moon.
There has to be another way.
Well, the floor is open. This isn't an engineering problem. In the end, you're talking about the oldest question mankind has dealt with when facing off against opposing humans. How do I keep them from taking what's mine? And physical force is the gold medal winner. That's not endorsement. It's a statement of fact. If you decide you're keeping it, you need more than a sign saying no commies allowed in order to do it. It's not enough to want something. You have to find a way to make it reality, and as established, options are limited. I mean, you can be indignant all you want, but the thing that stops me from walking into your house and taking your stuff is the threat of force. If not by you, then by law enforcement. So if you make a decision, this must be stopped. You must accept the potential application of force. Don't be upset because the bill for what you want is higher than what you want to pay. But yes, this means starting now, territorial sovereignty on the moon will be backed up by a rifle. Let's see where things go from there in episode 4.